I wonder if I might change direction slightly and get your thoughts on the Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka's assertion on Arise News about reactions to the election results by the Labour Party's vice presidential candidate, Yusuf Datti Baba Ahmed. Comments which Professor Soyinka described as fascistic. I mean, do you see that as part of the demonization of Mr. Obi and his running mate, as some have suggested, or do you agree that Datti Baba Ahmed went, or rather overstepped the bounds, and Professor Soyinka was in that regard justified to call him to order? I mean, I know you hold, or at least you have held, Mr. Soyinka in high esteem.
I still do. I have a lot of love for Professor Soyinka. I admire him. I respect him as a thinker, as a writer. I think everyone should read The Man Died, and Ake, his memoir, is beautiful, right? But at the same time, I disagree very strongly with him about this particular issue. And actually, because I respect Professor Soyinka so much, I went back and watched the interview. I had watched it when it aired initially, but I went back and watched it because I thought, am I missing something? And I think fascist is a really strong word. You know, fascist actually often makes me think of Mussolini's Italy. But I think we use it now, you know, sort of to address this kind of authoritarianism that's often populist and right-wing, you know, like in Hungary and even the former American president. And when you look at those situations, you can see why they have been termed fascist. And I did not see any reason that Mr. Datti Baba Ahmed's interview would have been termed fascist. You know, I think he was making a very strongly felt point about the elections. What he was saying, which again I thought seemed fairly reasonable, is that if our democracy is rooted in our constitution, and you then swear in a person who's been elected unconstitutionally, then you are in fact ending democracy. I think it's quite a reasonable position. Of course, we can argue about what that bit in the Constitution means, right? And I'm actually grateful for this whole election period because it's made me read things I probably never would have, such as the Nigerian Constitution, and also made me have quite a few suggestions for editing. But anyway, I think now we're talking about what does "and" mean, right? So Mr. Datti Baba Ahmed is saying that it's, you know, 2/3 and the FCT, and that's separate. And it's a reasonable argument. You know, "and" is a conjunction. We use it in that context often to mean plural, right? So we say Aisha and Yemi are coming. And we don't say Aisha and Yemi is coming. That's because they're two separate things, two separate entities. And of course, the court will interpret. But I don't think it's unreasonable for educated Nigerians who can read and who know what the word "and" means to make their own interpretations and to argue it. And of course, the fact that the Labour Party is in court means that they do not believe that this election is constitutional. And so I just didn't, I didn't quite see why it would be termed fascist. I mean, we could, I think a charitable way of reading Professor Soyinka's comment is that Professor Soyinka himself, I think it's fair to say that he is not given to restraint in language in general. And so maybe that's where that word fascist came from. However, I have suggestions for what we could use fascist for. We could use fascist for INEC. Because as it is right now, many Nigerians feel deeply cheated by INEC, deeply disenfranchised by INEC. And there's an authoritarianism, which obviously is the basis of fascism, at the center of manipulating an election. Because what you're doing is you're gagging people, you're forcibly taking away their voice. That is fascist. Fascist is all of the violence that happened during the elections. Fascist is the way that some people remain silent about that violence. Fascist is, fascist is a government that hasn't come out to address the very tangible and palpable discontent in this country. I think that that, and when I say that we can use fascist for INEC, what I mean is the fact that, so many of us, including myself, are convinced that this was not in any way technological glitch. I think that Professor Yakubu had an opportunity for heroism, and I think he wasted it spectacularly. Because he could very easily have become the hero of not just Nigerians, but Africa, because so many Africans are watching. They were so inspired by what happened before this election and the obedient movement. And so, I also think that the president, President Buhari, missed an opportunity for heroism, maybe his last chance at heroism, because Nigerians do not feel that I think Nigerians felt before the elections that he meant well and meant to support credible elections. I don't think many Nigerians think that now.
Right.
And I wish that he had taken a page from, the former
Very
president.
Very briefly, because we're out of time.
He was a really good man, a moral man.
Right. Just literally 10 seconds. The opposition parties are challenging the election in court. Do you think they'll get a fair hearing?
I hope they will. I think there's reason to doubt that because the Supreme Court has had rulings that just did not make a lot of sense to most people. And so there's reason to worry, but I'm hopeful. I'm generally hopeful. So I'm optimistic that they will do the right thing and that people will get justice.
I'm really sorry I had to interrupt you to end the program, but unfortunately we're out of time. I could talk to you forever, but thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and share these your thoughts about the elections with us. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is a critically acclaimed award-winning author, and she was talking to me from our studios in Lagos. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye and thank you for watching.
Let me remind you and anybody listening that we've had several cases of the final arbitration in this kind of election being placed in the lap of the courts. We'll go back all the way to the infamous, or for some people, famous and brilliant 12 2/3 decision. During that process, if you go all the way back in history, I never heard anyone from any side threaten the judiciary the way I heard it when Mr. Datti was speaking on television when I came. And since then, since that decision, we've also had even the decision of the court, which brought Buhari into power after the decision was given, after he had already been sworn in. And again, while awaiting that decision, I never heard the kind of language, the kind of menacing, blackmailing language as that which was to which we were treated by Mr. Datti. And that kind of attitude and that kind of go, do or die kind of provocation is not what I think we've all been struggling for.
I asked, going to your previous response, which part or what part of Senator Datti Ahmed's statement was unbecoming?
Okay, nearly the totality. Listen, the interviewer asked him several times. He said, what will you do if the Supreme Court judgment is against you? If the interpretation which you are offering about the constitutional aspect of this election, if it is against that of the Supreme Court and they find against you. And he kept saying, no, it's not even open to analysis. The word says and it's very clear. And the Supreme Court, in its wisdom, had better give this, in other words, his interpretation. I mean, this is trying to dictate to the supreme arbiter of the nation. Whatever you think of the Supreme Court, it is an institution we all revert to sooner or later. If not today, then tomorrow. If not about this election, maybe about the next election. But Datti kept saying, no, the Supreme Court has got, in its wisdom, to agree with me. That is what is known as fascistic language. It is not acceptable. And for me, it alienates people. It alienates even supporters. I know this for a fact. People come to me, you know how I relate to young people. I relate to those who have found certain problems with the spokespeople of this particular movement. I'm not interested in the other ones. Everybody knows the other movements. But there's a new boy on the block, as the expression stays. And many of us have been waiting for that new kid on the block. And so we have a stake in it. And wherever it seems to be going wrong, we're going to tell the truth to that new kid. And the supporters who also say they have allied thinking with us, that's all. But go and watch that tape all over again. Introduce that tape to any kind of neutral jury, members of whom don't even know anything about the Nigerian situation. Talk about body language, talk about vocal language, talk about the actual text of Datti's pronouncement. This is intimidation, and it's not acceptable. I refuse to be part of that kind of language.